Hello, it's Thursday morning, and Garland Nixon and Scott Ritter, and I think we got a lot to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter, and we got a lot to talk about, a lot going on in the EU, some interesting things. Before we get going, scottritter.com is his website, and he has a great program going on now called the Russia House. So before we get going, there may be somebody, it's possible, I doubt it, but there may be somebody who has not heard of your Russia House project. I think it's very important. I think it's critical that we have interaction culturally, socially, intellectually between the U.S. and Russia. And I'll just say this. It has been my experience in life, and I'll say this, being a Black person. A quick story. When I was in law enforcement, I got transferred to work with this guy. And a bunch of people said, man, that guy's a racist. This is going to be terrible. He hates Black people. And they told me, I was like, whatever. I'm going to go work with this guy, and it is what it was. I was an officer. He was a corporal. I'll shorten the story up. We became the best of friends. And his best friend became a Black guy for life. They were like brothers. And what I determined was this. He'd never really been around Black people. So he had a mindset of what he had heard or saw on television of what Black people were like. And once he was exposed, he was like, oh, well, crap, they're just like everybody else. There's some Black people that are a pain in the ass, and there's some that are really cool. And his best friend for life became this Black dude. And I think that's what, if you know what I'm saying, I think that's why Russia House Project is so important. Scott.
Well, I really appreciate that. I was getting a little nervous up front. I was like, man, is Garland calling me a racist? I was like, no, I'm not. But no, just to prove your point, I grew up in a military family back when the military was, going through the issues of segregation, the post-segregation environment. And while the enlisted ranks were being successfully integrated, the officer ranks were not. It was very rare to see a Black officer. And so I, was in, yes, there were Black people that I met, but I just viewed them as me. It wasn't until I got back to regular American society. It was actually in the Army where I remember going to boot camp and going to the chow hall, and like Blacks were sitting at a table and the Hispanics were sitting at a table and then whites were sitting. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? And then I was told by the whites, you got to sit at the white table. I'm like, why? Why are we doing this? Because they're Black, they're this, that. And so that got me. Then I went to college, and now I'm meeting non-military Black people. And I'm like, oh. And it was interesting because I'm like, well, maybe there's something about Black society I don't understand. I'm not, and so I became friends with a great guy, and but I've been thinking, well, he's going to be listening to Black music. I mean, because that's what Black people do. They listen to Black music. So naively, I'm like, so what kind of music do you listen to? And he puts on AC/DC, and I'm like, I can't do that. That's my music. And he's like, no, it's my music. That's our music. That's the whole thing. And that's the thing, the prejudices and the perceptions that follow you through life. Life is a journey of constant education. And the more you empower yourself with knowledge and information, the less likely you are to fall into the pitfalls of racism and, the other ignorance-based afflictions of society. Today in America, we're afflicted by Russophobia. And Russophobia is a disease of the mind. It's a disease of the heart. It's a disease that is manifested or comes to being because of ignorance about all things Russia. We have a media that is distorted. We have a government that's been promoting Russophobia for decades. We have academic institutions that are premised on the notion of furthering Russophobia. When you go get a Russian studies degree today, you're not learning about Russia, you're learning how to hate Russia. And so it has to be overcome. I had a very interesting meeting today earlier, and this is why we're doing this a little bit later. I was invited to be a participant in something called the National Unity Club, which is being formed by the Russian Duma, or their parliament. They wanted me to be an actual member, and I said, until our relations between our countries get better, I think me being a member is getting ahead of my skis. But what I would be is an observer. And so I was invited as an observer status to speak, and I spoke to them about U.S.-Russian relations. But the basic theme was, how do we move forward? How do we overcome the distrust and things of that nature? And what I found is that Russophobia is created a double-edged sword because of the way we view Russia. We're mistrustful of Russia because we don't trust the Russians. So then we deceive and we lie and we treat the Russians with less than the respect they do. And that's created a counterculture in Russia. I'm not going to call it, Americaphobia or whatever. They just don't trust us anymore. They're just like, why the hell should we ever trust you again? All you do is lie about us. And I tried to impart on them that this time, I think we're led by different people on a different path. We have to earn your trust again. But, if our governments open this door, then you have to be willing to allow the American people to walk through that door, to come back to you, to give them the opportunity to learn about you. And so what the Russia House is sort of preparation for this. It's a mechanism to provide a Russian voice, get a Russian perspective, and bring it to the American people so they can empower themselves with knowledge and information to offset the lies that they've been told for decades about Russia. Today, we had a fascinating interview with a man who was there at the founding of the Crimean Republic in 2014. And he was, somebody who has participated in the whole angst between Ukraine and the Russian speakers of Crimea from 1990 all the way up, sort of like the birth of a nation. It's a fascinating discussion that you're not going to get by reading what's available to the American audience. And so, it's not just, we had a pretty high profile interview with Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson, which was a fascinating interview. But just like we should understand that America isn't defined by our State Department spokesperson, et cetera. America is defined by the people that are in the nation. So we are speaking to the Russian people across a whole wide range of issues. And I'm very proud of the project, and I think hopefully it will grow, and so that it can serve as the vehicle of empowerment to an American audience. But it's a Telegram channel. It's a subscription-based channel. I mean, we're talking, $4 a month, maybe $40 a year for the subscription. And that has to happen because, we have to hire translators. We have good graphics. We have simultaneous, subtitling programs, things that cost money. And I can't send money there because of sanctions.
Right.
So, in fact, I wouldn't be allowed to do this program if we were doing it from an American-based social media platform, because they would shut it down. So I have a partner in Russia who has created a Telegram channel, the Russia House with Scott Ritter, but that partner needs money. So it's a subscription service that provides a financial stream that enables this to take place. I think some people might say, well, what's Scott trying to do? Get a all-paid vacation to Hawaii? No. Who wouldn't want an all-paid vacation to Hawaii? But that's not the purpose of this.
Right.
This is actually to facilitate the creation and sustainment of a very important informational vector to the American people about the reality of Russia today. So thank you for allowing me to talk about that.
I think it's important. And as I said, my experience, all the things that you're speaking of, I have seen in my lifetime. You know what I mean? Right here in America. So what you understand is, and you know this from being in the military, any group of people that you don't know, and people say, oh, this group, the Iranians are evil, who these people, whoever's evil. If you start hanging around, I'm sure like you were in the military, the Russians are the evil commies, right? And they're like, okay, Scott, you got to go over and you're going to work at these missile factories with the evil commies. You're like, oh boy, evil commies. I better watch all the time. And you start working around these people every day or whatever group it is. And you're like, well, hell, there's just no, and these are great. And then you develop friends and you start to like the, and you're like, holy crap. And then they're like, let's go out and get some shots of vodka. You're like, hey, I'm all, you know what I mean? It's like, I've found no matter what group of people you get around, let me say this. I got a friend, a fishing buddy. He's a diehard Trump, red hat, MAGA wearing Trump supporter, right? And of course, I have friends and family that are diehard Democrats, and what have you. They're like, your friend's a Trump supporter. I'm like, he's one of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life. He doesn't agree with you on some political and social issues. But if you ever spent time around him, you would like him too, and it's like, people who we get this mindset and we put people in this group. I don't like whatever it is. They're all bad. They're all evil. And it's a sad state of affairs. So bottom line, that's good work, Scott. And I appreciate it. Now let's get down to some important stuff. I think this is important. What's going on? Well, we got a coalition of the willing. Their plans seem to be falling into reality. EU rearmament plans meet resistance over debt concerns. What's interesting is, you and I have been talking in a few weeks back when they were like, we're at $800 million, and boy, the Russians are going to get it then. And I remember you and I were talking, you're like, yeah, they don't have the money. And you started talking about Germany a while back, say, oh, we're going to rearm. And then a year later, they're like, but we really don't have the money. I mean, your thoughts on you know what? I will say this, their military foolishness, mindlessness, is only surpassed by their economic models. If there's anything, anyway, Scott, your thoughts on these brain dead lunatics in the EU?
Well, I mean, this is what happens when fantasy meets reality. And we have to understand why these people are doing this. Kallis and van der Leyen and others, these are political and economic elites that rose to prominence in Europe at a time when the transatlantic relationship was of paramount importance, which defined U.S.-European relations. NATO, as an institution, was the glue that was holding us together. And it wasn't NATO, the old school NATO, where you had to actually have hundreds of thousands, actually, when you added them all up, millions of men, heavily armed men, ready to fight at a moment's notice. I don't think people remember, a lot of people today don't realize it, but in the 1970s and 80s, we had hundreds of thousands of American troops deployed to Europe, especially West Germany, and we were ready to reinforce them within 10 days with hundreds of thousands more, hundreds of thousands, not 5,000, not 10,000. Hundreds of thousands. We're talking about corps, divisions, armies. All that infrastructure was in place. When I lived in West Germany in the late 70s, it was an armed camp, literally, crawling with troops, tanks, tens of thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of aircraft flying over nonstop. On my way to school, you didn't go to school. It was about a 40-mile drive from the rural village where I lived to get to the school. You passed convoy of tanks going this way and that way. Overhead, helicopters were flying over. This is on a daily basis. Squadrons of aircraft would be screaming around, maneuvering every single day. That military organization back there was a real military organization prepared to carry out, large-scale conflict, etc. It was well-funded, well-trained, well-equipped. But then the Cold War ended, and the justification for maintaining and sustaining this went away. But they kept the NATO infrastructure in place because it had a political purpose beyond its purpose of a military alliance. And so the political aspects of NATO being a control mechanism, politically and economically, took prominence, and the military aspects were put in the back burner and eventually down in the basement and eventually just forgotten. So it's an empty shell militarily. So this is the reality of it. These people, exist to use NATO as a mechanism to exert political and economic control over a Europe that is beholden to the United States and is seen by the United States as being an extension of economic, foreign, and national security policy. Well, we got a new sheriff in town who says, that ain't the game I want to play anymore. That's a game that doesn't make any sense. We're spending a lot of money for nothing. You've got this shell called NATO. The only thing that gives it substance is the American military, and we don't want to play this game. We need you to pony up the money, etc. Trump tried this back in 2016. Remember, in the lead up to that, I wrote articles, other people wrote articles that said, what's the future of NATO? Trump is, but back then he couldn't break free of the deep state. He didn't have control of Congress, for instance, and he didn't understand how Washington, D.C. worked. He himself admits it. He says, I had no clue how to govern. And so he had to turn to the deep state to staff the positions around him. And as a result, as he tried to do things, improve relations with Russia, etc., he was stifled. And it didn't work. What that showed the political and economic elites in Europe is that they can ride out the storm. All they have to do is create enough controversy and they can ride out the storm. And it also led them to believe that all they had to do was position themselves strongly, hold the line, and the American counter movement towards Trump would take over and control Trump and make him go away. And so you ask, why are these people doing this? They're not doing what they're doing because they believe in what they're doing. They don't believe in their heart of hearts they need to spend 800 billion euro. They don't believe they need to build a military ready to drop on them because they can't do it. We can mock these people all we want, but they're not stupid. Okay, you don't get to that level of governance by being stupid. You get there by being a conniving, thieving, lying, cheating politician, but you're not stupid. And these are people who have achieved the highest layers of power. They're at the top of their respective pyramids, and they want to stay at the top. So Trump now is coming in, and this time they're trying to do the same thing, but they're hampered by the fact that Trump actually this time knows the traps that have been laid for him in the past, and he's taking countermeasures. He's dismantling the deep state. He has control of Congress. The resistance that's supposed to take place in America isn't taking place in America, and Trump's taking bold actions, especially with Russia. Trump wanted to have good relations with Russia before, but he couldn't because of Russiagate and things of that nature. This time he is just like a bull charging forward, and the Europeans are in a panicked state right now. So what we're seeing from these political elites is a lot of overreaction because they're seeing Trump move forward. So they're trying to get ahead of that. So to get ahead of a bold move by Trump, they need a bold counter move. This is why Keir Starmer, who is the prime minister of a nation whose military, if you mobilize it completely, can't fill a soccer stadium, is talking about taking the lead in a peacekeeping force to be deployed into Ukraine, even if the Russians don't want us there. We're going to do this. And the French are like, we will be there with you. And all the Germans are like, Achtung. Oh, no, we can't do that anymore. We're not supposed to do that. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the Germans. They all really want to get that arm up in the air, because that's who they are. And so they're trying to get, and they're acting big, but European reality can't sustain this. And so what happens is you have all these, politicians putting out these programs. Look what happened to Starmer. The British military came back and said, hey, wait a minute, mate. We can't do any of that. None of it. Zero. Squat. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. Well, it's not only that we won't send troops to Ukraine, we can't send troops to Ukraine. And the French military has told Macron the same thing for the same reasons why we discussed. Everybody knows that, anybody who's a real military expert, they talk logistics before anything else. Anybody sitting up there, I'm doing a big arrow here and a big arrow there and a big arrow here. And I'm like, well, how are you going to get the gas, the food, the ammunition? Where's that coming from? The trucks? Because those big arrows require, support. Where do you get the support? And I've always said of the French, they will never be able to deploy more than 6,000 troops to to Ukraine through Romania because they don't have the logistics sustainability. They can't do it. It's not. I mean, we can even question how many they could. Maybe they could get 20,000 troops carved up to go into Ukraine, but they can't get 20,000 troops deployed out of France to Ukraine because they don't have the ability to sustain it logistically, and neither do the British. Neither does anybody. Logistics costs a lot of money. When you speak of military organizations, we all tend to focus on the tip of the spear. The dudes with the camouflage on their face running around with M16s, go, hoo, 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 hoo. The guys in the airplanes, all that. But for every pilot that's in a fancy airplane, there's a whole bunch of mechanics on the ground. That's the sustainability aspect, maintenance, the guys that bring the fuel in. The fuel just doesn't appear in a truck. It has to be procured from somewhere and stored in a petroleum oil and lubricant facility. Who manages that? The gas station attendant, the military version.
How about this? Not to interrupt you. How about this? You ever watch like an Indy 500 race? That car can't run without a pit stop. You know what I mean? Around and around and around. Oh man, it's a great car, a great pilot. When he stops, these are the guys that do the tires. Everybody there. If you're in that pit stop, you are one of the best mechanics. I know a guy that used to do that. You're one of the best mechanics in the world. Some of these guys in the pit stops have masters and PhDs. One guy had a PhD in metallurgy. And he tested the metal stress, and before metal went into certain things, he tested it to make sure it didn't have zinc in it so it didn't deteriorate. So my point being, you have to have highly specialized, technical, skilled people in your pit stop, or if you got a plane that has hundreds of thousands of an inch of clearance for certain things, you can't just have a bunch of guys hanging around and if the plane breaks down, we'll take a look at it. You know what I mean?
Look, again, in the Cold War, just so you understand, back in the day, I'm aging myself, we used to do everything. I mean, in the Marine Corps, we cooked our own food. We had a chow hall that could go to the field because everything is expeditionary. Right. So, the cooks that we had there aren't just cooks. They're cooks that have to put on a uniform and go to the field and prepare meals and deliver meals to the Marines in the field and things of that nature. Our maintenance units, everything had to be, deployable. And that's expensive because, as you said, when things break, you need a specialist with specialist training. And that specialist training comes from a specialist school. And that specialist school is paid for by the military and has to be staffed with military instructors who are specialists. So for everything in the front, you got this huge tail, and that tail costs a lot of money. And what happened at the end of the Cold War is we did this whole thing. We need a peace dividend. And let me give you an example of the peace dividend and why it sucks when you go to war. During the Gulf War, the Army had a program. It was the O-1 Mohawk, and it's an intelligence gathering aircraft, 2 engines, props. I'm an intelligence officer, so I'm putting together an intelligence collection plan, and you're matching problems with resources, and you're allocating tasks to different units. And I was told that you can't. You got to be careful about the Mohawk. I said, well, what do you mean? Why do I have to be careful about the Mohawk? I mean, the book says it does this. I'm used to tasking. Yeah, but we have cut back on the support. And so a lot of the maintenance support and service support is done by civilian contractors. I said, well, why would you do that? It's cheaper. Yeah, but now we have a problem. I need the Mohawk. There it is. I need it to do something. And you're telling me you can't because to deploy this forward base, you have to bring the civilian contractors with you, and their contracts don't stipulate forward deployment, or, they have to voluntarily agree to do this. And you just complicated the hell out. You stopped becoming lethal. And this is in 1991. I can guarantee you that everything that's taken place since then has made that matter even worse. We don't have a military capable of self-sustainment anymore. Every aspect of our logistics, maintenance, sustainability is done by civilians, to include the old-fashioned tasks of getting something on a ship. We used to have, I guess they're called stevedores or whatever. But
That's what my
military
dad
people,
did. My dad was. He was a longshoreman. That's what he did.
but we had military people that did that.
Oh, okay.
But now we have to use civilians like your father. No offense to your father,
No.
but your was he a member of a union?
Yep.
And the union basically says, the union doesn't say it's your duty to die for your country.
Mm-mm.
The union says it's your duty to earn a big paycheck for hard work. I'm not saying, but you're not there to die for your country. A stevedore, I can actually slap in the face, throw a rifle, and say, "Go to the front line and fight if I need you to do." Your father's like, "That ain't going to happen." And that same thing, I can say, "You have to work 72 hours nonstop, PFC schmuckatelli, because this is war, and I don't give a damn how tired you are. I don't care if you're hungry. Get to work. This is your job. This is your duty." You can't do that with a civilian. And my point is, all of NATO is broken this way. All of NATO is broken this way. They can't afford it. So now we come back to the crux. We have people literally biting off more than they can chew. They're committing to programs that are unrealistic. They're totally detached from reality, and they're dealing with amounts of money that when other people who are less than enthusiastic about bringing down the United States, which is what this is all about. I just want people to understand, when Europe starts talking about spending 800 billion euro, the goal is to be disruptive of American foreign policy, of Trump's foreign policy. It's to throw a monkey wrench into the mix, to keep America trapped and not able to move forward and reliant. Because one of the things that Starmer and Macron and everybody else always said is they put forward these big plans and they go, but in the end, we have to be backstopped by America. So these are all traps for America that they're setting for America. None of them are going to happen. They will all fail. Trump is committed down this path that he's on. And again, I say that and people are like, "You've drinking the Kool-Aid." No, I'm stating a statement of fact. It doesn't matter that in this case, I actually support the policies, but it doesn't matter what I believe, what I support. This is a statement of fact. The Trump administration is undergoing a revolution in domestic political affairs and international national security affairs. Just think of what they're doing with Russia and how they're doing it with Russia. Again, you can be critical of it, but it totally breaks the paradigm that had been previously established by past precedent. This is totally new. Why? Because it's revolutionary in nature. And
let me show you something. I think is an important part of this conversation, and I think you'll agree. One of the things that happens here is this, and you hear this again. According to the Telegraph, top defense sources have dismissed the idea that Starmer as political theater, claiming, and where have we heard this, fails to consider operational realities on the ground. From the very beginning, Sergei Lavrov, Vladimir Putin, on and on, over and over, they said that the things that happen, everything that deals that are made in the beginning, they said, look, you better take a deal now because it ain't going to get better. It's going to get worse based on realities on the ground. Hey, the more I take, the weaker you get, the worse deal I'm going to give you, if any at all. And now it's interesting that the Russians have said, look, we're going to have to take into account operational realities on the ground. And now the actual military people, forget the politicians and all of these, the military people, what do they say? They got 700,000 people on the ground. They got planes flying and drones night and day. We do not have a supply line from here to friggin' Lvov. The operational realities on the ground say we can't. It's interesting that the military people and the people, the Russians, say that, but these clowns, the EU clowns, they want to ignore that. But I guess if you are a military planner, military person in the UK, and somebody says to you, Colonel Ritter, we need you to send these guys forward, the only thing that matters to you is the operational realities on the ground.
Yeah. Let's just focus on the Russians real quick. They do things today completely different than the way they were structured and organized to do things in 2022. For instance, logistically, the concept of logistics pushing. You push forward fuel, you push forward ammunitions, and you push forward it to be an operationally supportive mode, which means you push forward your ammo in a dump that then people come to and it's the quickest way to get ammo to people. The same thing with fuel. The problem is in the modern battlefield, if you put forward those dumps, they get hit and then they blow up. So what the Russians have had to do is break up their ammunition and push it forward in smaller things and then push it forward even smaller. And so the bottom line is when the Ukrainians do interdict something, they don't disrupt operations anymore. The same thing with fuel. But this impacts operational flexibility, mobility, because instead of coming in with maybe 3 to 5 days worth of sustainment, the forward troops come in with a day's worth of sustainment, and then they have to be resupplied using penny packets. And that's a whole different logistical sustainability. And the reason why I bring this up is the Russians have mastered this technique so that they can continue to put pressure, have all the artillery fire come down that they need, the drone support, the electronic warfare support, all of it's happening, but they had to totally restructure their sustainability, logistic sustainability. Poland has been screaming about how they're going to mobilize hundreds of thousands of men and get ready to kick Russia's ass. And we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. And the Polish military had to come out and go, we got 14 days of artillery ammunition. That's it. 14 days. We run out of ammo and we all die. Well, that's because, and even if they did have the ammunition, NATO has not adjusted. I can guarantee you that the way, if you just take a look at NATO exercises, and I've been looking at them, we don't do innovative battlefield support. We are supporting the battlefield using the same logistics models that we had back in the Cold War, which is a lot of logistics push, but it creates huge vulnerabilities that the Russians are ready to exploit. NATO can't fight a war. I've been saying this from day one. They can't fight. And the longer we wait, the more NATO is going to agree with me. I remember when I first started saying this, we had all the people out there, Scott, you're just this, Scott, you're that, Scott, guys, I did this for a living. I've actually planned large-scale military operations. I understand sustainability issues better than most. And when I look at something, I can quickly tell you whether that is viable from a logistical sustainability perspective or not. And I can tell you everything NATO does based upon their own actions, their exercises, which I monitor very closely, they are not sustainable in modern high-intensity conflict. And now the Poles have come out and had to admit it. They don't have the ammo to do this. The British had to admit it. We don't have the force structure. The French have had to come out and admit we can't do this logistically. Everything I've been saying, everything you've been saying is 100% accurate. And it's worse than what we're talking about here. Yeah. Which is the conversation we've had before. And I used the German model, that 100 billion euros that the Germans brought up in 2022 to refurbish and shine up their military. It disappeared into the gaping black hole that is the reality of their military situation today. They haven't funded their military properly. The repairs required to make this thing work it's like taking your F1 Formula One car that you talk about, the pit stop, or NASCAR car, finely tuned machine. And while I can put a lot of paint on the coat and I can fiberglass patch it up, if I don't repair that engine, or if I start replacing the engine with substandard parts, so instead of having a Chevy 396 with a this, that, and this, that, and that, I end up with a Mazda 3-cylinder, but it looks good because it's got a NASCAR fiberglass shell on it. It can't race. It's not a race car. And NATO looks good. They've got all their generals with their crap and their politicians, and Mark Rutte can sit there and do his Rutte thing and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's just a fiberglass shell. What's inside of it can't race. NATO can't race. Russia, their car is ugly as hell. First of all, it's probably by a guy from Lada, so you're sitting there going, it ain't pretty. Doesn't need to be pretty. It don't break. The engine inside there, it may not be a sexy Chevy 386, but whatever the hell it is, a Ural, whatever, you can pour sugar in the gas tank and it's going to work. You can throw sand in the engine and it's going to work. It's going to work in the weather, all weather and all this stuff. That's what you need. NATO can't do that. NATO has nothing. They're a race car that can't race, not only because they don't have the pit crew anymore, because imagine having a pit crew, instead of being the dedicated crew that you had, every race I had to go out to the local college, to the frat house.
Right.
Hey, how many NASCAR fans? Oh, I'm a NASCAR fan. How'd you like to be in a pit crew? Oh, hell yeah, I could do that pit crew thing. And you bring them together, and they can't work as a team because they haven't trained as a team. They don't have the expertise. This is what happens when we contract out. We don't get experts anymore. We don't get people dedicated to the mission. So we now have race cars that look good on the outside that don't have the engine. We have pit crews that can't do the work. The Russians have dedicated pit crews. They may not be as fancy as our guys. They may not have the, because we like to put the coveralls on them with the patches. And the Russians come in with the coveralls got a rip here and a stain there, and we go, oh, who the hell are these guys? Well, watch them work. And
let me throw this at you, because I was watching Patrick Lancaster, and he was wandering around some town with a bunch of Russian soldiers, and he, like, some lady says, "Oh, come in the house. Let me show you what the Ukrainians did." He started to go, "No." They said, "Don't go in any buildings." But no, could be booby traps. But they're like, "Do what we tell you to do." The soldiers were saying to Lancaster, "We are responsible for you. You will do only what we tell you to do. You will walk what we tell you to walk. You follow instructions." Okay, drones are chasing them. They shoot it down with a shot. Here's my point. This is a different kind of warfare with drones and all kinds of things, totally different kind of warfare. But the Russians and the Ukrainians kind of learned it together. They come up with some drones, you come learn how to fight it. They attack you like this, you learn, okay. And both of these, people know how to fight this kind of warfare, right? They know how to fight drones. They know what they do. They know how to use them, etc. Okay. You throw a bunch of greenhorns from France in that have been training from some friggin' NATO book that was written in 1983, and put them out on a modern day battlefield with the drones all overhead. Now, you put some Russians, I see the Russians out there, all of them now. They're driving in the vehicles. They got two guys standing out here with a shotgun. And not just a shotgun. You're like, what? They're like, oh, no, you got to have number one shot. That gives you, they know what to have. They know what the best rounds to have. They know everything they need to do. You take a bunch of friggin' guys from Sussex and you throw them out on this battlefield. I don't care how much logistics they have. I don't care what. They ain't lasting hours. They're all going to get wiped out because they have no idea what this kind of fight. So that's the other part of it. You can't, even if they had 250,000, 300,000 troops to rush right now, they don't know how to fight this. They go out into the woods and they'd be obliterated.
Yeah, one of the things that is amazing about this conflict is mine warfare. It's not just the minefields that are laid down, but as you go forward and you clear a path, both sides have these mine dispensing vehicles. Right. As you clear path, they're just laying minefields behind you. As you go down a road, they're laying minefields behind you. So in traditional thinking, I've cleared a path, I'm going forward. How many people actually go back into the rear area security route and do a mine sweep of that? One of the reasons why everybody's like, why aren't the Russians doing the big arrow? Well, because, as you said, the Russians are like, we ain't going in there until we do the check. We have to check this. We have to check that. We have to check this, because warfare today is nasty. The tricks and these minefields, the ability to instantly lay down a complex minefield using remote delivery mechanisms. The Ukrainians use drones. They have these Baba Yagas that come in and start lay mines. And this is why oftentimes you see the Russians will launch an attack over an area they thought they had cleared, and all of a sudden it's boom, 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 boom. Why? Because the Ukrainians are pretty damn good at what they do. They laid down a minefield that the Russians didn't detect, and they got hammered. That's why war is complicated. And the Russians do the same thing. I had to laugh because the other day on I think it was on X, I was watching this Army, cavalry guy. He's like, hi, I'm Staff Sergeant so-and-so, and this is my beast. This is my steed, the M1 tank. We aren't afraid of the Russians. We train for this. And when we go to war, first of all, we'll be bringing massive amounts of firepower. And you think you're going to come close to us? No, we'll have our cavalry scouts out there screening us. And I'm going, wow, you've got real textbook skills here, because this is straight out of, the FM, whatever the hell they use. But what you're not saying is, when you have that many vehicles together, you're going to start losing them because it's massed opportunities. You're not going to prepare for the drone storm or the artillery coming in, and your scouts are going to go out and they're going to do you have the ability to clear mines forward, backwards, and sideways continuously? The answer is no. So what the Russians are going to lose is suck you in, then throw in minefields. Your support's going to come out, get bogged down. You're going to need maintenance. You can't get it. Why do you think so many vehicles are abandoned on the front that are intact? Because you can't retrieve them. Why? Because the vehicle is ahead of itself. Minefields have been laid. The support vehicles can't get up to them. And the people inside have to leave the vehicle, have to abandon the vehicle. This is the reality of modern war. You don't see. When was the last time you saw a massed tank attack in this war? It was in June of 2023 when the Ukrainians tried to burst through the Russian defenses at Robotyno. And next thing you know, you got stacked dead Bradleys with stacked dead Leopards and Abrams. And why? Because you can't do a massed armored attack anymore. And if the U.S. Army is training to do massed army attacks, that means that the U.S. Army is going to lose the first battles it fights, because the first battles cannot be won with old tactics. The U.S. Army, the U.S. Marine Corps would be well put to take advantage of whatever improved relations we might get with the Russians, to send delegations over to talk to them about, hey, about drone warfare, or hey, how'd you do this, to learn about it. Because these guys have the expertise that we're going to need for the next battlefield. And hopefully, if we have good relations with the Russians, it won't be a battlefield against the Russians. Hopefully, it won't be a battlefield against anybody, because we'll be smart enough not to fight a war. But if we are going to fight a war, man, we should be able to fight and win war the way it's being fought today, not the way it was fought 30 years ago.
Two things I'll throw at you too. EU politics. One, of course, we see this again. What do you know? In Moldova, a pro-Western government person who's been talking about running, for president, candidate, EU candidate. They're talking about running for office. Sorry, you got to be arrested for doing, probably, mopery on the high seas or some made up thing. And here's the other thing that I think is of consequence, and that is, and I think it's related, because this is what's pissing them off. Oops. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second here. Okay, here we go. Italian electrical giant announces return to Russia. Italian household equipment manufacturer Ericsson has announced its return to Russia after. Okay, so what as the Keir Starmers of the world and Macron start to fade away, as they're like, their military saying we can't do it, their banks are saying sorry, we don't have the money, we can't loan the money. As their thing starts to fall apart, you see that there is a building group of people. They call them pro-Russian, but they're more often than time, they're just pro their own country, and they don't want to be dragged into something that's not. It's like if you say, I don't want to screw my whole country up for the EU, well, you're pro-Russian. But we're seeing now companies start to say, hey, you know what? We got to get back in this market. This crap is falling apart. Your thoughts on how this crazy anti-Russian crap is starting to politically affect, and economically, we're seeing, I think, it unravel.
Well, let's talk about another nation out there, Romania. Romanians were supposed to have a presidential election in November. Well, they did, actually. They had the first round, and two candidates emerged, one of whom was a guy named Călin Georgescu. Yeah, I guess. It turns out he was like favored to win this thing. The problem is Georgescu's platform is, we don't want to be beholden to the EU, and we're damn sure not going to do this NATO thing. We're not going to allow Romania to be a springboard for action into Ukraine, etc. And this is at the time when Keir Starmer and Macron and others are talking about, we're going to put, European peacekeeping. European peacekeepers can't go into Ukraine unless they go through Romania, just so everybody understands. That is the logistical thing. You'll say, well, what about Poland? The problem with Poland is that Poland has a huge American military presence, and the United States won't allow that to happen because we won't allow ourselves to become a tripwire, sort of a screen for NATO malfeasance or European malfeasance. So we won't tolerate that. We'll just tell the Poles that if you allow this to happen from your soil, we're out of here, and the Poles don't want us out of there. So Romania is the only choice, and they have a very compliant government that's rolled over and done everything that NATO wants it to do. The French have a major port facility, a major base, an air base, the whole thing. They got 1,000 French soldiers on the ground in Romania, which they're having trouble logistically supporting, but that's a different question. But the point is, if this president gets elected, and it looks like he was going to, all of that comes to an end. And so all the European bluff, which we now have exposed as a bluff, gets, deflated. They can't allow that to happen. And so they actually used money from USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy to fund a non-governmental organization to fabricate a Russiagate in Romania, to take a story about how TikTok was used to influence, and remove all the appropriate names that said this was funded by Romanian politicians and all this. Removed it and made it look like the Russians did it, and then handed it to the Romanian outgoing president, who handed it to security services. They shut this thing down, and they took it to a compliant judge who annulled the election. And then that judge turned around and wouldn't allow this person to run. And now that's fine, because in doing this, that party became even bigger. So they put forward a second candidate who's now been banned from running as well. This means that Europe is no longer a democracy, that these political and economic elites that we've been talking about trying to trap Trump and tie up his hands are willing to destroy everything they claim to stand for, including democracy and the will of the people and self-determination. And they're doing that as we speak in Romania. This is a big deal, because if this party is able to get a candidate into the presidency and this candidate wins, Romania is taken off the map from a NATO European Union perspective, which cripples whatever they want to do going forward with Ukraine. France, Marine Le Pen, they're talking about arresting her now. Why? Because she will be the next president of France if there's elections. And so the whole system's like, no, we have to keep France in our corner, which means we have to game the system. Europe no longer stands for democracy or democratic. Free speech does not exist in Europe. I was supposed to go to Germany. I ended up saying no, because everything we're saying on this show would get me arrested when I get off the airplane. And I'm a practitioner of free speech. I mean, I'm smart. I'm not stupid. I know there's a right place to say things and there's a wrong time to say things. And I wouldn't go to Germany deliberately to cause problems. I'm fully capable of holding my tongue. But it's beyond that. It's you're not even.
You might not even have to say anything, because one of the things we saw is of several countries, they arrested people at the airport. They grabbed people in customs trying to come through the airport. You know what I mean? So they grabbed, what was it? Ali Abu Nima got grabbed somewhere. Richard Medhurst, a bunch of people who I remember last time I went to Venezuela, when we came back, they, pulled me aside to ask me some questions and had a funny look on their face, but they didn't do much. But they've upped that to the point now where it's not even about what you say anymore. If they see you and the things that you are doing and standing for as a threat to their narrative, not to anything real, but you're pushing against the narrative, when you land in that country, you are not safe.
Right. See, in America, I have freedom of speech for the moment. And so I can post things, I can say things, I can do things, and it's relatively free of consequence. I mean, yeah, the FBI did come in my house last summer and try to intimidate me into being quiet and this kind of stuff, but I'm still here. But this phone would get me arrested the moment I got off the airplane in Germany. Because if they took this phone and they went through my social media postings and went, well, you said here that this person is a Nazi. Arrest them. You're not allowed to say that. Or here
you're not allowed to insult people. Did you know that?
Yeah, you can't insult
people in Germany for, quote, insulting someone online. And it's not only can they arrest you for insulting someone online, they can fine you, they can imprison you, and if you can say something that you don't believe is an insult, and the other person can literally say, I didn't take it as an insult, and the government can say, well, we interpreted
we found it to be insulting nonetheless. Yeah, no, Europe is screwed. I mean, people made fun of J.D. Vance when he, called Europe out at the Munich Security Conference. J.D. Vance is 100% correct. Europe is a fundamentally broken institution that's lost faith with the values that it's supposed to uphold, values based upon democracy, individual civil liberties, freedom, etc. Europe is an autocratic dictatorship that serves the political and economic elite, not to further the interests of the collective, but to suppress the collective to further the interests of the political elite. Europe is everything we're against. This is why I have no hesitation in saying that Europe is the enemy of the United States. And unless Europe changes, Europe will become a mortal enemy of the United States, because the American people continue to believe that there's some sort of intellectual and moral connectivity between the American people and Europe. And so as long as we believe that and you have that connectivity, that poison can come back into our minds. We can't live in a nation where we tolerate, as the Democrats would in a heartbeat, arresting people for memes, for posts. Etc. We saw them shut down YouTube channels and everything because they didn't agree with the Democratic Party platform. Now, I'm not saying the Republicans aren't capable of doing that. The Republicans are doing really bad things when it comes to immigration and free speech, horrible things. And I'm dead set. When you have a girl write an op-ed, and then to have a gang of hooded ICE thugs sweep her off the streets. This happened to a Turkish girl in at Tufts. She didn't do anything wrong. She's in the United States of America, getting an American education. So she practiced the principles that America claims to stand for, and she published an op-ed piece that's critical of Israel and the policy. That's the right of every American. And she's trying to get an American-based education, and we say, no, that's criminal. Well, bull, because if I wrote the op-ed piece, it's not criminal, unless you're going to say you're going to start to criminalize it, and then we got a problem. But we should have a problem when it's criminalized, when somebody who comes to the United States on a student visa to take advantages. What are the Republicans saying? You can only come and plug into the American educational system if you buy into the official dogma. And when they say the U.S. government, do they not understand that it is a transitional thing? The U.S. government 6 months ago wasn't the U.S. government today. And when she came over 6 months ago, the government, and if you keep this up, Republicans, MAGA, the U.S. government 3 years from now may not be the government here, because you're screwing up free speech, and you ran on a platform that said, we believe in free speech. Well, bull, you don't believe in anything, because you're arresting people for exercising their free speech, and you're disguising it by saying, well, they're not American citizens. Well, the Supreme Court has never held that free speech is only a right given to American citizens. It's given to people who are lawfully in this country to exercise free speech, and they're allowed to be. Indeed, the whole concept of free speech is that it is open season on the government, on bad policy. If your policy ain't bad, then don't be afraid of criticism. If you oppose the ideas that people put out there, counter it with better ideas. If she wrote an op-ed piece that insults you, write an op-ed piece in response. Engage in a battle of ideas, values, etc. But when you react by sweeping this poor lady off the street in violation of everything, because
wasn't it written like a year or 2 years ago? It was written a long time ago, I think. Also,
yeah, no, they're just going through. They grabbed her, and the law says that if I grab you in New York, you have to appear before a New York court. They're taking her to Louisiana. Again, everything the Republicans do speaks of jackbooted thugs. And again, if they learn, this is muscle memory. Once you train American law enforcement and the American justice system to operate this way against a certain segment of society, that easily can become going after. I mean, the next thing they'll say is, well, if you're a naturalized American, you don't have free speech.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they're going to say, yeah, if you're an American, you don't have free speech.
Yep.
If we find it to be so. This is a very slippery slope that we're going down. I don't know how we got off on that, but
no, it's a good point. And what I always say this when people talk about free speech. I always say this, and people forget this, and this is the foundation of the First Amendment. It protects unpopular speech. You don't judge the free speech whether or not somebody's allowed to stand on the corner and say, I love Israel, I support Ukraine, I hate Taiwan, whatever the government wants you to say. Great, right? Because 6 months ago, you had to stand and say rainbow flags for everyone. You know what I mean? Whatever they wanted you to say when a given regime is in, right? You judge free speech when somebody stands up and says something that you or I just say, oh, that's terrible. Ooh, I don't want to like that. My position is this. Okay, that's terrible. I would not want anybody to say that, use that kind of language to talk about other people. You got to allow them to say it. And now you can, as you said, now I can stand up and I'm free to say they're wrong. But their speech is more protected than I am. Because the speech that must be protected is the speech that, and this is what we see, questions government policy.
That's whole
what we're
purpose
seeing now. You can't question government policy. That's the one. You can say all kinds of terrible things. They will let you get away with all kinds of stuff. But once you say, I don't agree with government, and it may be policy that I 100% agree with, but you may say, I want to do away with it. You know what? You ought to be able to say it. That's where we've gone to. We got 1 minute, Scott. You got, because I know you got to go.
It's not you ought to be able to say it. You have a duty and responsibility to say it, and the Constitution protects your right. Free speech is not something that the government gave to us. It is a God-given right to us. It's something that we said we're going to form a government, and you don't get to take this right from us, because we have to have the ability to criticize you freely at any time we want. And criticism means we get to say your policy sucks, and this is why your policy sucks. This is why we support. And this is protected for everybody. And the moment we violate that, which we are violating as we speak, we become a lesser nation and populated by a lesser people.
And you know what? I was looking in the chat, and there's people in the chat that say, Garland, you're a fill in the blank. You're a jerk. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, Scott sucks. He's this and that. And I never take him out of this chat. I don't take him. You know why? Because those people need to be in the chat. You know what I mean? Now you get the trolls and the NAFO trolls and stuff. They got to go. But I see people in the chat, that roundly criticize me. And I'll take a position and roundly criticize it. But you know what? Somebody else in the chat says, I don't think that's right. You know what I mean? I think maybe Garland's right. Maybe everybody else did.
I stopped reading the comments a while back because I stopped. My wife was saying, you're not smiling on the show anymore. And I'm like, well, I'm reading the comments.
Yeah, exactly. But
look, I haven't read the comments and I got a smile on my face.
Exactly.
So.
For the most part, I don't read them, but you know what? You can kind of see every now and then I have to glance, because you'll see somebody, they'll like put the same word over, or they'll do something over and over. And I'm like, there goes a troll.
No. First of all, I personally liked reading it because it's like getting an EKG of how this conversation is going.
Yeah.
You read the chat and you're getting a flow, and it's good feedback, but it can be very negative.
Well, you know what it is for people. I'm going to go for people like us who are emotionally really invested, that we do this, but we really believe in this stuff. The truth is this. You can get your feelings hurt sometimes. And I know, I'll look in the chat and you're doing the best you can, and somebody said something, and to be honest, we're human, right? We're human. We try to be tough guys. You're a Marine, I'm an ex-cop, whatever, right? But I look at it sometimes, and as a human, it hurts my feelings in a way, because I look and I'm like, they just don't understand where I'm coming from. You know what I mean? They just don't understand me. And, the truth is, some people just ain't going to understand you. But
they don't want to.
That's right. Everybody go to scottritter.com. That's scottritter.com to find all of Scott's good work. And don't forget his Russia House plan, operation, whatever you want to call it, is on Telegram, and you can access it from scottritter.com. Share this on all your social media platforms, and be back at 3 p.m. with the one and only Larry Johnson. We're out.